Our gospel reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Mark. It's found in chapter 13. Jesus said, "But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be aware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey. When he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake, visit me. Then they will also answer, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty? That does not belong in this gospel verse. The word of God for the people of God. May the Spirit add a blessing for understanding of it. That Matthew scripture was from last week. Apparently I thought we needed to hear that one again. But the one from Mark, that was right. Where it ends when he says, keep awake. But it's kind of an interesting Christmas scripture, isn't it? When we think about Christmas scriptures, we don't usually think about the end of the world, right? We don't think about this reading from Mark, which is a lot of times called the little apocalypse. Because he's talking to disciples about what happens at the end of the world. So how do we put Advent and apocalypse together? I promise this isn't one of my fancy little wars on Christmas that doesn't start really until December 25th. I've kind of given up that crusade, I think, because I'm going to lose. But this message about the end, or the message about when Jesus comes again, certainly has something to teach us about Advent. Because Advent is a time we're supposed to prepare and get ready for the coming of Jesus in our own lives. So let me give a little bit of a context of why this reading can speak to us during this time of Advent. A little bit of context about who would have heard it, or what it would have sounded like when Jesus was preaching it, and then who would have read it when it was written down by the author of the gospel. Just before this reading, the disciples are basically kind of bragging to Jesus about the temple in Jerusalem, and how big it is, and how large the stones are, and what an impressive building that it really is. And Jesus' response to them is basically to teach about the coming destruction of the temple. He said there's going to be many false prophets, and eventually there's going to be no stone left on top of another from the temple. There's going to be nothing left of it. He's telling them that this is not where you're going to worship God anymore. You see, at that time, the Jewish people believed that when God was on earth, God's presence resided in the temple, in the holiest of holies. So that temple, of course, for them was their focal point when they worshiped God. Jesus is saying, after my death and my resurrection, this temple is going to be destroyed. It doesn't matter, because God's presence is everywhere. My death, my crucifixion, and my resurrection is going to show you that we find God everywhere. Not just in the temple. We find God wherever we look for God. And that begs the question, where do we look for God? Jesus is telling his disciples that we're no longer going to look for God just in this temple. You're going to find God in the world, amongst you. And that's what Mark's primary message is in this little apocalypse. He's saying, where do we look for God in this Advent season? Where will we see God at work? There's a question. What would we do if we knew the world ended tomorrow at 7 p.m.? That's not a bad question to ask ourselves once in a while. It kind of helps us reorient maybe our priorities, makes us think about what's important in life. Now, it's not obviously a great, uplifting, warm-hearted thing to think about. But if we were to think, if we knew the world were going to end tomorrow at 7, Monday at 3 p.m., or we knew the date of the next week, what would we do? That's what kind of Jesus is telling his disciples in this little apocalypse story in Mark. He's giving them a picture of what the end is going to look like. And it's doom and gloom, and it's falling stars, and it's kind of, we've seen it portrayed in movies and books and stuff. But it's not a doom and gloom end of story. That's not what Jesus meant it to be, some terrible, horrible time for us to endure, find again when Jesus comes back. For the Christians that heard it, the temple had been destroyed. Religion as they had known it, the world as they had known it, turned upside down and destroyed. They had really expected Jesus to come back in their lifetime. By the time Mark's gospel was written, it's maybe a generation, maybe two, after Jesus had died. So they're starting to question, well, is Jesus coming back? Are these teachings about what he said true? That's when the Gospel of Mark goes back to teaching the disciples and say, listen, I am coming back, but no one knows when. Not even me. And we all know that people have been obsessed with predicting the end of the world, right? Y2K, computers have no idea how to format 2000, the world's going to crash, we're all going to be in the Stone Ages. I knew a family in college who were digging their bunker for the end of the world. They were prepping for the end of the world in the year 2000. Then we had December 21st, right, in 2012, 5 years ago, that was going to be the end of the world. There's been predictions for as long as man has been around, when this is when the world is going to end. We like to speculate, but we don't know. And even thinking about it kind of misses the point. We're trying to predict when it's going to happen, because the promise of Jesus' return isn't something that's going to be horrible or terrible to endure. It's hopeful that Jesus is coming back. The promise is that Jesus will come back and things will be right again. It's a reminder that everything that we think of as so permanent, so important, is really very fragile. And I think we know this, or we suspect this, when we see the falling leaves in autumn, or we experience the death of a friend or family member, or there's an illness that takes longer to recover from, or we see reports on the news of violence all over the place, or climate change, or whatever. When we're reminded that things aren't permanent. When we're reminded of what truly is important. And so that kind of goes back to the question, what would we do if we knew the world was going to end tomorrow? It reorients us. Kind of refreshes what we see as priority in life. Would we reconcile with a long-lost friend or a family member? Would we finish a project that we started years ago, only to keep putting it off? Maybe we tell our kids or other family members or friends, of course, that we love them one last time. But what would we do? It kind of clarifies where our values are. That's not a bad question to ask as we speed through the holiday season from Thanksgiving to Christmas, where it's easy to get caught up in all of the hustle and bustle getting from here to there. And it's easy to lose sight of what's important sometimes in that hustle.
It's that time of year when you unbury all the decorations from the attic and the garage. You put up the Christmas tree. You find that missing stocking with the reindeer on it. You clean out the gutters so that you can string up the lights before it snows, or you're the last dark house on the block. Kids have road games, early practices, that huge history project, and final test to study for, along with 5 different Christmas parties and your son's extra holiday hours at his part-time job. And can you start driving again? Don't forget to write down the dates and times for performances and the rehearsals of the programs at church, at school, and at the senior center, where they want you to come dressed up as an elf. In tights. Then there's the shopping. Your son wants a new gaming system that can read his mind. Your daughter wants a doll that you're going to have to make payments on. Your sister's emailed you 3 times asking what you want for Christmas, and why you haven't just gotten an Amazon wish list set up already. Your spouse thinks maybe the two of you should just get each other a new furnace for Christmas, or maybe just donate all the gift money to orphans in Cambodia. And then there's the Secret Santa thing at work. What's the white elephant gift again, anyway? School sent home a note saying half the kids have strep. Your spouse came home with a box of double extra strength cough medicine and a case of Kleenex boxes. You're pretty sure there was something wrong with that last piece of fruitcake you just ate. And your daughter's so stuffy she looks and sounds just like Rudolph. Christmas is at your parents' house this year, and at your spouse's brother's place down south, and at your aunt's place on the lake. If the weather's nice and your kids sleep in the car, you might just make it to all 3. And you should make sure that you stop in at the office party for at least a little while. Also, your friends are in town, so could you set aside a night of the week to do a special Christmas just with them? Oh, and can we do it at your house? Your boss needs you to make sure you get that project done before Christmas, even though he's going to be out of town until January. And you have to cover for your coworker who spends every Christmas in Hawaii. Also, none of your contractors will answer the phone after December 15th. Plus, you need to make that green bean dish you're so good at for Christmas dinner, and that peppermint dessert all the kids love for the other Christmas dinner, and something gluten-free for Uncle Dale, and a bag of ham, just in case your mom's stove blinks out again. Also, there's cookies and carols at the church on Saturday afternoon. Everybody bring 2 dozen. Oh, and don't forget, Jesus is the reason for the season. Merry Christmas.
This isn't a rant or a sermon about priorities around Christmas, but I found that video. I like it, but it's snarky. And I tend to be snarky myself. But that's the way Christmas feels this season, right? We're rushing to a million different things. We're planning family, we're planning work, we're planning school stuff. It almost seems like you get to Christmas and you breathe and exhale because you survived the season. And I don't think there's any rule changing that. Probably if we were honest with each other, we love that part of the season and we dread that part of the season. Kind of all at the same time. Usually the way that works. And there's nothing wrong with the parties, and the festivities, and the cards, and the presents, and getting ready. And there's nothing wrong with finding ways to see where God is in it too. And that's part of what this little apocalyptic message in Mark is telling us. Is where do we see God? If we were to think again about priorities, what would we put at the top of the list? One of the surprising ways I found God, or saw God at work, was yesterday. The family and I, we went to Open Door Mission. We volunteered for a while, taking stuff out of boxes, arranging it, putting up. They have a store, basically. It doesn't charge any money, but people can come and get necessities, from bedding to household items to toys, whatever people donate. So you can go volunteer, and you take all the stuff out of the boxes, you sort them, take them out to the shelves. People get 15 minutes to sort. My youngest son came along with us, and he is known to kind of be particular about his time. Meaning, if it's too long doing one thing, he gets real bored. And we started to be there for, I think, 3 hours, helping. And he didn't know if he wanted to do that, because there's other things to do, right? So we got started, and we kind of started out just rearranging and putting together shelves, cleaning up the messes. We eventually worked our way to the back, and we took the stuff out of the boxes and put them into carts, sorting from toys to household items to clothing. And I was surprised, because he lasted all 3 hours, and only once did he ask about food, what was for supper. Only one time he mentioned, I want to go, or I want to be done. He mentioned it to one of the workers. He says, I can't wait till my shift's over. And she said, me neither. But he did. He worked his little tail off, and those were the only 2 complaints that he had. And we got done when we were leaving, and we asked him, what'd you think? And he goes, I had fun. And I almost fell over, because that was not the response I expected from a little guy, because he's pretty honest. But he did have fun. And he said he even wanted to go back. And I was surprised. And I think, and I know that God was working there to show us that we have reasons to be thankful. And I think it even might have sunk in a little bit for 5 or 10 minutes until we got in the car and decided where to have supper. But it was one of those areas where I wasn't expecting to see God, and I did see God. That is what Mark is challenging us with today. Is where are we going to find God in this busy Advent season? Where are we going to be able to see God and experience the peace of God in our lives. God will not be where we expect God to be. God will be in the most unexpected places. Back to the question of what would you do if you knew when it was all going to be over? Not supposed to be a somber or a downhearted thing, but just as a question to ask, what would our priorities be? If I were able to focus on one different thing this year instead of making something or preparing for something, what one thing would I want to kind of focus a little bit more on? I think that's what that question can help us do. Not that we need to eliminate all this other stuff and remember and only focus on Jesus, because that's not practical. But if we were to pick one priority and one thing that we could focus on this year, what would that be? And that maybe is a challenge for us as Advent season. Find one thing where we could focus our energy, or one thing we want to find out, whether it's spending more time with family or less time with family, or shopping for a different family, or volunteering somewhere. Or if there's one thing we think of, well, what would I do if I knew it was all over tomorrow? Maybe that's a way to help us get through the holiday season and not rush to the end feeling we've survived it. Maybe enjoy it a little bit more.